Good morning and welcome everyone to today's Professional Matters webinar, which is about teams and how they are affected by agency and advertising requirements. My name is Elise Palmer. I'm a communications specialist here at the Real Estate Council of BC, and I'm excited to be hosting today's session. We just want to start by acknowledging that we are hosting today's session from our office in downtown Vancouver, which is the traditional territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. I would like now to introduce two of our two guests today, who are Marty Douglas and Bruce McCoubrey, and they're two professional standards advisors here at the council, and I'm hoping that you can both start by introducing yourselves. So Marty, can you start?
Thanks, Elise. My name, obviously, Marty Douglas. I've been with the Real Estate Council as a professional standards advisor for a little under 1 year now. But in fact, it's my 49th year in real estate. Primarily licensed as a managing broker with offices as high as 75 licensees. My past industry experience also includes the Real Estate Council for 6 years and the Real Estate Errors and Omissions Insurance Corporation for 6 years. Happy to be here.
And Bruce?
Yes, thanks, Elise. My name is Bruce McCoubrey. I'm one of the professional standards advisors here at the council. My role here is to provide information and assistance on practice-related topics to licensees, licensed individuals, but I also answer questions from the public on the duties and obligations of licensees. I'm a former trading service licensee, first licensed in 2005 with over 10 plus years of experience in the Vancouver market.
Great, thank you both. And now before we get into the webinar, which I know everyone is eager to do, I just have a couple of housekeeping things to get out of the way. So the first is that today's webinar will be available on demand after the session, and you can use the same link that you used to access this session. Secondly, we would love to hear from you during the presentation. So if you would like to ask a question, please send it through the Ask a Question function, which you'll find on the right-hand side of your GoToWebinar platform. Our Manager of Communications, Marilee Peters, will be monitoring those questions, and we will be answering them at the end of the session. And if we, by any chance, don't get to those questions, feel free to either send it directly to one of the professional standards advisors, and we'll have that contact information at the end. Or if you ask it and we don't get to it, we will be following up afterwards with written responses to some of those questions. And finally, I just want to mention that we will be sending out an evaluation survey after today's session to each of you. So please take that opportunity to give us feedback on the webinar, and if you have any suggestions for future topics. We want to make sure these webinars are a useful part of your professional toolkit, and we appreciate that you tuned in today. Because this series of webinars is specifically designed to help you as managing brokers to support you and in training and supervising licensees. Now, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Marty, who will be walking us through the learning objectives. So, Marty, we're going to turn off the webcam so everyone can see the presentation. And take it away, Marty.
All right, thank you. Welcome again. At the PSA department, we know that today's topic, teams, is one of real interest. So thanks for joining us. In this webinar, Bruce and I will introduce a PowerPoint presentation of teams that's been developed specifically by the Real Estate Council of British Columbia for you as managing brokers to use with licensees at your brokerage. We're going to walk you through the new teams, agency, and advertising PowerPoint presentation, and we will answer your questions at the end. We hope to be wrapped up by about 10:45. The topics we're going to cover today include teams and rules, how and why to register a team, team names, signing documents as a team, advertising as a team, and teams and the relationship with agency. As far as learning objectives, we hope that each of you will walk away from today's webinar with a clear understanding of the Council's requirements for registering teams and for advertising in teams, and how to help ensure that teams operating at your brokerage are appropriately fulfilling their duties, their agency duties to clients.
Okay, and Bruce, let's first of all jump into talking about the rules, or I guess rule, that we're discussing today.
Thanks, Elise. Teams were created as a vehicle to allow licensees to advertise jointly without listing all their names. So there is actually only one reference to teams in the entire legislative framework. It's Rule 4-6, subsection 5. If the council approves a team name for a group of related licensees, real estate advertising may also identify the group by this team name. So for example, if Marty and I decided that we wanted to advertise our services together, we could register the name the Professional Standards Team with the council. And if the council approved the use of that name, we could use it in our advertisements. The Professional Standards Team is neither a licensed brokerage nor a registered trade name. Now, the name of the related brokerage must always be included in any form of team advertising. And while there is only one rule regarding teams in the legislation, there are many other implications for teams with regards to complying with the rules.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. And we will be talking about those implications. But first of all, Marty, let's talk specifically about the requirements for a team.
Well, surprise, surprise, a team must have at least 2 people, one of whom must be licensed. And all licensed team members must be at the same brokerage. And licensees can only be a member of one team at a time. The licensed team members all have an obligation to notify the council in writing whenever any team member leaves the team or a new member joins. This requirement also applies when a team member transfers or surrenders their license. The form for this is available on the council website under the Forms tab. All licensed team members need to be aware that as individual licensees, they have an obligation to comply with all of the provisions of the Real Estate Services Act, the Real Estate Services Regulations, bylaws, and rules. The fact that one licensee member of the team may be the lead licensee in no way diminishes the other team members' legislative responsibilities and obligations.
Okay, thank you. And Bruce, what are the requirements or guidelines, I guess, for team names?
Yes, approvals of team names are made on a case-by-case basis. So the following guidelines are applied when considering team name requests. So a team name must convey to the public that a group of individuals from the same brokerage, which may include unlicensed assistants, is working as a team. Team names should include words like group, team, network, or associates to make this clear. Now, to ensure the public is not misled or confused, a team name must not give the impression of being an incorporated company or a brokerage. Team names such as Marty Douglas and Company or Douglas Real Estate Services will not be approved. Now, the terms realty and real estate may not be used in a team name, as they may give the impression of being a separately licensed brokerage. But the exceptions to this are the use of the terms real estate team or real estate group at the end of a name. For example, the Bruce McCoubry Real Estate Team or the McCoubry Real Estate Group. Now, no team name will be approved that may be confused with an existing brokerage. No team name will be approved that is identical to an existing approved team name. And you will be advised in writing of the council's decision regarding your team name request. Typically, team name decisions are made within 10 to 15 days of the council's receipt of the team name request form. And team name approvals are sent to the requesting licensee and copied to the managing broker.
Thank you. And Marty, we know that many teams are named after the team leader. Is there anything that licensees who are considering becoming a team and naming after the team leader need to be aware of?
Well, it's understandable that some people want to name their team after the team leader, but some thought should be given to that, because the moment a team leader decides to retire or perhaps assume activity as an individual licensee, not on the team, then the team name would have to be renamed and re-registered. You can't just sell to the remainder of your team and carry on to retirement or as an individual licensee. So the Marty Douglas team carries with it the implication that when Marty Douglas is no longer licensed, the team will be deregistered and re-registered under a new name reflecting the team members of that team.
Thank you. Okay. Moving now into our next topic, which is about when to register. So Bruce, when should you be registering yourself or registering as a team, and is it voluntary?
Well, if a group of licensees wish to identify themselves by a single name and market themselves under that name instead of their individual licensee names or a brokerage name, then they must first register that team with the council. This is the best practice for public protection. Now, it is voluntary in the sense that you only need to register a team if you want to advertise as a team, and there is actually no cost to registering a team. Now, you can find the team name request form on the council's website on the form page under the forms for individuals. It's pretty self-explanatory. Now, you'll need to fill out the team name you're requesting to advertise under, along with the names of the team members and, of course, the brokerage name. The council will get back to you if there are any issues with the team name that you've requested. And whenever you add new members to the team or members leave, you need to submit their names to the council using the same form.
Okay. And as you mentioned, that's usually about 10 to 15 days to get back.
10 to 15 days, yeah.
Okay. And so once you are a team, Bruce, how does it affect your agency obligations?
Okay, so members of teams typically share information about all of the consumers to whom they provide real estate services. And this really is the essence of the team concept. It is the value proposition that a team advertisement makes to consumers, that by choosing the Bruce and Marty team, they're getting the combined value of the expertise that each of us brings. Because of this, teams aren't able to separate their agency relationships, regardless of whether they operate under brokerage agency or designated agency. Now, members of a team are considered to be collectively the designated agent of a client. Accordingly, anything that an individual designated agent is required to do under the rules, a team acting collectively as a designated agent is required to do as well. So that means effective June 15, 2018, team members cannot act as a designated agent for the seller and a designated agent for the buyer in the same transaction. A team also cannot act for two separate buyers who each make an offer on the same property.
Okay. And Bruce, just to follow up on this, I know that as PSAs, you hear from licensees who are members of teams who say they don't share information. What is your advice or the PSA position on this?
Yes, great question and a common one, but it's important to remember that the public expectation is that team members are all working together. It's a promise that you make to the consumer when you advertise as a team.
Okay. And Marty, can a team still deal with unrepresented parties, like an unrepresented buyer, for instance?
Again, a frequent question, but the answer is maybe. The team is representing a seller and an unrepresented buyer wants to make an offer on the property, the team could deal with that buyer as an unrepresented party, provided the team first makes the disclosure of representation and trading services, followed by the disclosure of risk to unrepresented parties. So with the appropriate disclosures, the team can deal with an unrepresented buyer. However, the team must encourage the buyer to seek independent representation from another licensee and consider the risks of working with an unrepresented party. Those risks include, at the top, slipping into an implied agency relationship with the unrepresented party. Then the licensee will be in an undisclosed dual agency situation, and of course, as you know, dual agency is prohibited. Even if the licensee deals with the unrepresented party in an appropriate and professional manner, if the unrepresented party subsequently claims the licensee gave them advice, assisted them in drafting the contract, induced them to remain unrepresented, it will always be a he said, she said scenario. So anytime a licensee deals with an unrepresented party, the licensee should be very cautious and document in writing all discussions with the unrepresented party.
Okay. Now, Bruce, what if the team is already acting for a seller? Can one of the team members stop acting for the seller client and begin acting for the buyer and then leave, rejoin the team afterwards?
No, you should encourage the buyer to seek independent representation. You cannot end your agency relationship with the seller and then begin acting for the buyer as his designated agent, even with the consent of the seller and buyer, because in ending your agency relationship with the seller, you would be preferring your own interests and the interests of the buyer to the interests of the seller, and you would likely have received confidential information from the seller that would be directly relevant to the buyer's position in the ongoing transaction. Thus, your ability to advise and represent the buyer would be impaired by your inability to disclose the seller's material confidential information.
Thank you. Marty, let's move on now to our next section, which is about signing documents as a team.
So when we start with the MLS listing contract, that's a contract between the brokerage and the client and team members. The full names of all team members must appear. In addition to that, on the exclusive buyer's agency contracts, buyer agency acknowledgement forms, and the contracts of purchase and sale. And none of these are advertising, which is why you cannot use the team name. All team members' names must appear on contracts because the team is deemed to be collectively the designated agent for the client. This means that while confidential client information may be shared between team members, strict client confidentiality must be maintained from other licensees at your brokerage. If you have a large team, you may find there's not enough space on the forms for everyone's full names. If this is the case, you would indicate in the space provided, such as on the agency disclosure section of the contract of purchase and sale, that the names of all designated agents are included on an attached, appropriately numbered schedule. However, any team member can execute the documents. The signature of every team member is not required.
And let's also talk now about advertising as a team. We've talked about agency and signing, and so let's move into advertising. Chris?
Yeah, okay, so once the council has approved a name, teams may identify themselves by the team name in the advertisements, but the brokerage name must also be prominently displayed and must be easily readable in relation to the rest of the advertisement. Including the name of the brokerage at the bottom of a website or print advertisement in small type does not satisfy the requirement of the rules. And all advertising that includes the name of unlicensed team members must identify them as being unlicensed.
Okay, we're gonna get into some scenarios now. Bruce, can licensees who are advertising as a group or a network or whatever do that without having to register as a team?
Well, think carefully about what your advertising is saying to the public. For example, if Marty and I advertise as Douglas and Associates, that is sending to the public the message that we are working together to serve clients. If we're not actually sharing information or working together, then our advertising is misleading to the public. If a group of licensees wish to identify themselves by a single name and market themselves under that name instead of their licensee names, then they must first register that team name with the council. So we advise that licensees choose a name that clearly conveys to the public that they are working as a team by using words like team or group or associates in the name. Now, using logos and slogans can also mislead consumers into thinking you are a team. So if Marty and I advertise our services together saying something like, get the professional standards advantage, that's arguably giving consumers the impression that we're working together. The wording expert or specialist is more subjective, but again, the advertising may give the impression to consumers that you're a team. So licensees should assume that all statements in an advertisement will be taken at face value and interpreted on their plain meaning.
And I know this is a really common question, so we're going to talk about another aspect of this, which is, Bruce, what about licensees who regularly advertise listings together on a common website, for instance?
Okay, great question. If two or more licensees advertise together, which include listings, presumably they're all with the same brokerage and presuming that they're not co-listed, it could imply that any of those licensees have knowledge of the listings and may be deemed to be representing the sellers. An example being, if a member of the public sees an advertisement that has listings they are interested in and there is more than one licensee identified, who do they call for information on each listing? So in that scenario, we would advise that each listing advertised would have to specify who is the listing agent to contact for that listing, and also caution the licensees about the potential perception of the public.
Okay. And Bruce, one more scenario for you, and then we're going to move on to Marty. What about the opposite, which is, for instance, a group of licensees who want to work together but don't necessarily want to advertise together?
Okay, so two or more licensees who regularly work together but don't necessarily advertise together do not necessarily need to register as a team. However, they still need to respect the principles of agency. They are both designated agents of their clients. They still share information and they cannot take part in dual agency. One licensee cannot excuse themselves from the agency relationship and represent the other side.
Okay, thank you, Marty. And we had a slide on this and I'm just looking for it. I'm not exactly sure what happened to it, but so apologies for that. But the question is about family members, Marty. What's our advice about family members?
Well, family members may or may not work as a team. It all depends how they work. They could actually represent both sides in the transaction, one for the buyer, one for the seller. Provided that there'd be no sharing of information, no dining room table talk about clients. They could act for separate sides, provided that they disclose the relationship to both clients and receive the consent of both clients to move ahead with that representation. But anyone in that situation has to think carefully about risk management and use their professional judgment. If there was a complaint against them, how would they prove to a discipline committee there was no sharing of confidential information? As an add-on note, licensees who have the same surname, who are engaged by the same brokerage, probably family members, such as the Blogs, could advertise together as the Blogs, and registration of that surname with the council is not required.
Okay. And Marty, just before we get into questions from the audience, any additional thoughts that we want to leave licensees with about teams?
Well, I think we go back to the original introduction by Bruce that the registration of a team through the rules was simply a vehicle to allow licensees to advertise as a team. That is the sole function, is to allow advertisements without including all the names. So the essence of a team concept is that you are assumed to be sharing information. As a result, you are all designated agents of any client that your team represents, be it buyer or seller. Remember that licensed team members will be paid and continue to be paid, can only be paid by their brokerage. A simple guide, if it's advertising, and the answer is yes, then the team name plus the brokerage name would be included. If it isn't advertising, then all member names plus the brokerage name. And finally, as a courtesy, always wise to discuss with your managing broker before you apply to register a team to find out whether there is specific brokerage policy regarding teams, and that could involve payment to employees of teams, for example.
Okay, and actually I realized that since these are all managing brokers listening, it's probably wise for them to think about having policies at their brokerage about the exact things you just mentioned. Okay, so we are going to turn the webcam back on and we will be getting into some questions now. We've been getting several in our chat function, so thank you, and please feel free to send in additional questions in the Ask a Question function. Okay, so got the webcam back on. So the first question we've got is, can a group of licensees share the cost of admin support, lead generation, coaching, and training, for instance, by paying a fee to a separate company and advertising themselves as powered by XYZ network and not be a team with respect to agency?
Okay, so I think the key thing to remember is to come back to the basic principles of the team concept, which is that you will be sharing confidential information of the clients of the team. So bearing that in mind, if that is the case, then the confidential information of the clients must be kept within the team, within team members, and not shared with anyone outside the team. And Marty, do you have anything?
Well, yeah, and if a group of licensees who collaboratively decide to engage in advertising don't necessarily have to be a team. If they're hiring people, if they're sponsoring an open house weekend or a caravan of new construction stratas, all those sorts of things, provided that the advertising doesn't indicate that they're a team, would list their individual names, then those cost shares and the joint effort in marketing would not force you or create the impression of being a team.
Okay. Another question. We've had a problem where two team members have independently and innocently written offers on the same property in a competing situation. What is the listing licensee to do at the time of presentation to the seller when it was discovered?
Well, first thing, talk to your managing broker. I doubt that licensees alert other licensees in their team that, oh, I'm writing an offer on the house on Elm Street, because that might be a disservice to their buyer. It is confidential information after all. You have a multiple offer situation. Office policy should dictate how that is handled. Once you're in a competing situation like that, I think the managing broker would probably appoint a designated agent outside the team to step in. And if I were the managing broker, I think I'd want to be also supervising the offer process.
Okay. A follow-up question, well, actually it's a separate topic, but can a brokerage prohibit teams at their brokerage?
Never had that question. I'm not sure on the answer to that. It may be a question we could answer by email.
Okay.
Unless Marty has any.
No, well, my thought would be that certain smaller size brokerage may very well want to prohibit teams, especially if they're working under brokerage agency rather than designated agency, because they are a collective group already. The rule says the council may approve, which means there's some discretion at the council level for teams. That would imply to me that since the managing broker is in charge of the conduct of business, if that was the policy they chose, why not?
Okay. Okay. This is a specific question about the Medallion Club, so you may not know the answer to it, but the question is, the Real Estate Board of Greater Vancouver has the Medallion Club. Can agents be registered as a Medallion Club team, but not operate as a team, i.e. do not work together and do not advertise as a team?
If you're going to call yourself a team, it doesn't matter what the words are in front of it, you're a team. You need to register. The Medallion Club is available in almost every board. I think licensees advertise themselves as member of the Medallion Club of the Greater Vancouver Real Estate Board, simply as that. And if they want to collectively advertise a group of licensees who happen to be Medallion Club members, then you would make sure that each member's name was on the advertisement and there was no reference to a team.
Okay. Is there any way a team can set itself up that would allow a team to work as designated agents independently of each other, providing they do not share confidential information?
Okay, so actually this was one of the questions or issues we addressed in the webinar, and the answer to that is no. Once you are a member of a registered team at council, you are deemed a collective, designated agents for that particular client. You cannot separate your agency relationships once you are a member of a team.
Okay. Another question, can members of a team also advertise on their own under their own individual licensee name? Yes. Okay, well that's an easy answer. Let's go to the next question. Is a licensed assistant automatically considered a designated agent for all of the clients of the licensee?
Well, there is no official status or classification as licensed assistant. That's something that brokerages and licensees have blessed themselves with that name. So the licensed assistant, if they're a team member, they're automatically a designated agent of the team. The fact that if you advertise that you were a licensed assistant to Bruce McCoubrey, that would imply to me as a member of the public that you're a team together. You should register if you've got licensed assistants and you're advertising as such.
Okay. Next question, are there teams in rental and strata management? This person has only ever heard it in regards to trading services.
Now, I'm not sure on the answer to that, Marty. Are you aware of anything in regards to teams for those?
Property management is typically a brokerage agency situation. And so all property managers are a collective together within that brokerage. So teams would be redundant. Strata management falls into the same categories.
Okay. Another question about advertising. Instagram and other social media ads or websites by teams seem to regularly not identify the brokerage. Is this allowed?
No. The answer to that is no. The brokerage name must be prominently displayed, easily readable in all your advertisements, whether you are a team or an independent licensee.
Okay, and on that particular note, we covered that pretty extensively in our last Professional Matters webinar, which was about advertising, and you can find that on the licensee knowledge base. Okay, next question, is it possible to have a licensee pay the expenses of another licensee that is not part of their team so they can refer buyers to them?
A licensee can only receive remuneration from its brokerage. And so compensation to a licensee off team would not be permitted by the team leader writing a check, for example. So it would have to be through the brokerage.
Okay, so it looks like we don't have any more questions, though we did talk about a question beforehand that we got earlier, which was about teams who have set themselves up to have dedicated buyers agents and dedicated sellers agents inside the team, and they advertise that. Is that allowed? What's the position on that particular topic?
So if they are a single team registered under a single name, licensees cannot separate themselves into two sub-teams, if you like, which I think is the meaning of the question. That's not possible because obviously all those team members will be the collective designated agents for the client that they're working with. They cannot separate into separate teams under that single name.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it depends on the size of the team. Large teams, anecdotally, we've heard, have split themselves up to allow referrals back and forth, created a separate team. But again, two separate teams internally can run into the same problem. They're all designated agents of the buyer or seller. They couldn't act, they would have to refer. So I think teams have probably adopted the same as many individual licensees, developed relationships with licensees. They know, like, and trust that they're comfortable referring a unrepresented buyer to and develop a reciprocal arrangement.
Okay. Looks like we got an additional question, which is, if a property is co-listed in the same brokerage with two individual agents, are they considered to be working as a team?
If it's a co-listing, and then it wouldn't necessarily be considered a team. It's just a simple co-listing, and we do have information on the council website regarding co-listing, some of the risks and issues associated with that. But a co-list is strictly a co-list.
And both licensees are designated agents of the clients. Co-listing sometimes comes into play in a family separation situation, co-listings between brokerage, co-listings within brokerage, within a brokerage, and they require, as Bruce has pointed out, real serious thought about co-listing because of the risks that are involved.
Okay, and I guess one final question, which is how much does it cost to register a team?
It actually costs nothing to register your team, and the adding or removal of team member names doesn't cost anything. And obviously, that form, the team name request form, is available on the form section of our site.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much. So if we have no other questions, we'll be moving on to the end of the presentation, which is just a thank you to everyone for attending our Professional Matters webinar on Teams, Agency, and Advertising, and also thank you to Bruce and Marty for taking part. As I mentioned at the beginning, the webinar, if you'd like to watch it again or send it to someone in your brokerage, is available through the same link on demand as the one you accessed today. It will also be posted on the licensee knowledge base in the next week or so. We will be also posting the PowerPoint from the webinar on the licensee knowledge base. If you have any additional questions that weren't answered today, or you think of them afterwards, you can send them to advisor@recbc.ca. And if you have any general questions, you can send them to info@recbc.ca. Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone for attending.